Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Auburn spring game just wrapping up. Absolutely miserable day, but you could take a little bit from how that offense looked. There's also some even bigger news when you look at this spring game, and that's the visitor list. I mean, you take a look at the recruits they had coming in from the 2024 and 2025 class. A lot of Alabama commits, a lot of Georgia commits. I believe a total of five-star recruits from that 2024 class on campus to take in the Auburn spring game. A lot to talk about. Before we get into it, though, I just want to say thank you to you guys. Like, the support you guys have shown truly means a lot. We absolutely appreciate it all. So if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dale, before we get into the visitor list and talk a little bit about the recruiting, let's talk a little bit about what we saw on the field. Now, granted, the weather absolutely miserable. Kind of hard to run some elements of that new offense under Hugh Freeze. What were some of the big takeaways heading after the spring game here?
And probably the one takeaway is it feels like Robbie Ashford, assuming they don't bring another quarterback in the spring, which sounds like is certainly a possibility. He's got to be the guy. I mean, you just look in terms of dynamic playmaking quarterbacks. That's pretty much what Hugh Freeze has had since his Ole Miss days. And again, he even said like TJ Finley, that's not his skill set. Gurner, they just aren't the athlete that Ashford is, and that's what Hugh Freeze is going to want.
I think Gurner has some chops, but if you're asking me, we're playing next Saturday, week 1. It's Robbie Ashford, and it was kind of funny. Like when TJ Finley got his reps in, Hugh Freeze was on the mic and throws into triple coverage the first play, keeps it on his own read, and Hugh Freeze is like, "Yeah, that's not his skill set," and then he takes a sack on like 3 consecutive plays. It kind of seems like TJ Finley might not be the quarterback one for this Hugh Freeze offense. But going back to what you said, like Robbie Ashford has all the traits that Hugh Freeze wants in a quarterback, and you don't need necessarily the most talented quarterback in terms of arm talent in that Hugh Freeze offense, because they're not going to ask you to fit it into tight windows. You have to be able to play outside the pocket. You have to be able to extend plays with your legs and make those easy access throws that Hugh Freeze asks you to make. You go back and look at Hugh Freeze and how he's developed quarterbacks at the college level. Like even back to his Ole Miss days, like Chad Kelly, those guys were not necessarily the greatest quarterbacks ever. Hugh Freeze is going to make any quarterback look pretty damn good.
Well, yeah, you look at who Hugh Freeze has worked with. I mean, Bo Wallace, Chad Kelly,
Malik Willis is probably the best example.
Guys who had NFL looks and got their shot in the NFL really didn't. I mean, Malik Willis definitely too early to definitely say, but obviously off to a somewhat slow start. But those guys, he made them look like Heisman level players, and he got them to the league. Like he makes quarterbacks play way above what they are, and that I think is what you got to do for Robbie Ashford, because last year in what he played, he obviously struggled a little bit, as did the offense as a whole. But man, there's like some talent there, and if they can just mold him into something, and again, he's kind of got the look of what Hugh Freeze I think wants.
And I think the quarterback situation the last couple of years had a lot more to do with the kind of offense they ran and the personnel they had around them. Like we haven't seen this lack of talent on the offensive line and the wide receiver. That offense last year was Tank Bigsby. Tank Bigsby running the football and Robbie Ashford. If it wasn't that, they weren't moving the football. Really lack of talent at the wide receiver position. The offensive line play last year, absolutely atrocious. You asked me my biggest takeaway from A-Day, from the spring game. I think that offensive line, that first team offensive line, has gotten meaningfully better. Gunnar Britton playing. You got 2 really good transfers at the tackle position, and Dylan Wade coming from Tulsa, Gunnar Britton coming from Western Kentucky. 2 guys that almost every Power 5 team wanted. Auburn's able to land 2 of them. Avery Jones at the center spot coming from East Carolina. And then you got Connor Lew, the true freshman that Hugh Freeze seemingly throughout spring, anytime he got a chance to talk about him. That first team offensive line, whoever quarterback was running with that first team offensive line, that was the offense that was moving the football down the field during A-Day.
And that should be helpful, because I personally think Jarquez Hunter is really good. I thought he was really good with Tank Bigsby. I didn't think the gap between those two was frankly that big. And obviously Robbie Ashford's going to be a guy who use his legs. So if they can run the football effectively, they'll at least give themselves a chance to be a reasonably effective offense, because I think, honestly, Auburn played pretty good defense through most of Harson's tenure. It's just like they could not figure out how to move the football, in particular, get a quarterback to play at a reasonably high level.
Yeah, no, I think that was a combination of just lack of personnel and scheme. And you look at this Auburn team heading into 2023, like that's where it gets into the recruiting. Like this team from a roster standpoint is not quite there to compete again with Alabama and Georgia. That's why you bring a guy like Hugh Freeze in, who's a phenomenal recruiter, and then he's a very good developer of talent, especially on the offensive side of the ball. The two biggest things that Brian Harsin just absolutely miserably failed at Auburn. And so I think Hugh Freeze, maybe you're looking for like a 6-6, 7-5 record, 8-4, maybe. But I think this is a year away from Auburn kind of being back because they got to get some more talent in this roster. I'm really interested to see how they approach this May transfer portal, whether they bring in another quarterback. TJ Finley, I just have a feeling that he's going to be transferring out. But you got to get some playmakers on the wide receiver room too. You look at the spring game, I get it. It was very rainy, but there was not a playmaker on the wide receiver position that you felt good about hitting some explosive plays.
Yeah, in a handful of drops, and at the end of the day, yeah, ball's wet, whatever. But that's D1 football in the SEC.
Yeah.
You got to make those plays. You got to catch the football, wet, rain, shine, whatever. And you're right, they didn't have it. I think that even Hugh Freeze kind of you could hear he wasn't wildly confident in that group, and he's like, we need somebody to make some plays. I would imagine that'll be a position he's going to be gunning for in the transfer portal and beyond, especially in the spring. So I don't think
it's got to be an attractive spot for wide receivers. Like if you're a reasonably solid wide receiver, like you're going to get significant playing time in this Auburn offense with one of the best offensive-minded head coaches at the helm. Like you're going to have a chance to really put up some numbers in this Auburn offense. I think one of the second takeaways that I got from is I think this defense, and you noted it, like under Ron Roberts, I'm excited. I've always liked Ron Roberts as a defensive coordinator coming from Baylor, obviously learning behind one of the best in Dave Aranda at Baylor. I think this defense looked retooled. I think you have some nice transfers here. I'm really excited to see a guy like Justin Rogers on the fronts. And my biggest takeaway here is I thought both sides of the ball on the trenches looked pretty solid, meaningfully better than you saw, especially on that offensive line. Than you saw in 2020.
Frankly, you look at where they hit the portal hardest. It was on the two fronts. You look at all that orange on our lads. They're telling you they hit those positions hard, and they needed to on the defensive side mostly because they did lose a lot of NFL players and good players, but they got guys back. I think Marcus Harris is a really, really good player. I like this defense again. I think it was good. I think it had the bones to be good again. You're getting a fair amount in the secondary back of a unit that I thought played okay. So I think the defense should be pretty tough, assuming that, again, you just get the culture back in place where guys are playing really good football up to what they should be playing. But to me, it's like they have the bones to be good enough.
Yeah, and I mean, before we'll move on to the recruiting, because I do want to go over some of the players that were on campus here. But to finish up on some players that caught my eye, I like the running back room. You noted Jarquez Hunter, who's just been really good behind Tank Bigsby. Brian Batty gives you some juice in terms of just playing in space, but Sean Jackson, like that dude means business running the football. I would not be surprised if you see a decent amount of him behind what I think is a much improved first team offensive line. Rivaldo Fairweather is another guy that was really, really sought after in the transfer portal. He's a guy that you're seeing so much more motion of the tight ends. I think he's a guy that you want to get out in space in the flats, give him the ball in space, and let him go be that athlete. Now getting to the massive recruiting weekend. Now, you look at when Auburn had their spring game, the A-Day, like no other SEC team was having their spring game besides Vanderbilt later tonight. And quite frankly, you're not really competing with Vanderbilt on many of these commits. And we talk about how does Auburn get back to like where they should be. It starts on the recruiting trail, winning those battles against Alabama, Georgia. You take a look at the guys they had. Perry Thompson, who's been on campus a bunch. He's an Alabama commit, but if you're picking me a guy to potentially flip, Perry Thompson is a guy. Cameron Coleman, another 5-star wide receiver. Obviously, the athlete KJ Bolden is probably going to be a phenomenal safety. DeMarcus Riddick, the Georgia commit. And then you also had Landon Thomas, the tight end, the 5-star tight end, who's a Georgia commit as well, and Jordan Ross, who I think they have a phenomenal shot at. You had a lot of guys on campus for most of them overnight stay. This is where I think his 2022 game or the 2023 season matters, but I think this 2024 recruiting cycle matters a little bit more.
Well, that's interesting because you heard Hugh Freeze say, "I need to be the CEO. Yeah. I need to engage boosters. I need to engage the fan base." And that all kind of when you think about Brian Harsin's tenure, he pretty much didn't feel like he wanted to do any of that stuff that you needed to do in the SEC. No. And then Hugh Freeze is clearly he's very well experienced doing it with probably getting a little head start on NIL at Ole Miss before it was legal, and that's the thing that brought him down. But
He's been doing this.
But like now it's full go, and he's gonna be probably foot on the gas pedal. He's gonna try to get his players what they deserve or get their value, whatever you want to say.
Yep.
And he's gonna take that tact, I think, that Brian Harsin just didn't have. And when you want to recruit against Alabama, Georgia, all these national programs, even Ohio State type names, you got to engage the whole power of the brand behind it. It can't just be about football. And Hugh Freeze obviously said, I'm going to be engaged in every part of this program, and it's going to be done the way it needs to be done in the SEC to be really competitive.
That being said, he's noted, I don't want to call plays because I'm going to be he's calling plays. He's calling plays. Hugh Freeze is going to call plays. I have no doubt about that. And I think if you're an Auburn fan, you leave this weekend. Yes, it was hard to tell the actual, and you never really get a ton out of spring games if you're being honest. But the biggest thing that you absolutely have to love is how this offensive line looked. That's probably my closing.
Physical. You got a physical football team. You got physical running backs. You got a physical front seven on defense.
I think the defense has always been physical. I don't think they necessarily played bad defense again with Brian Harsin, but that offensive line, the recruiting of the offensive line, the development of the offensive line, like there's a reason that Bo Nix goes to Oregon and starts putting up big time numbers. It's hard. It was hard to succeed in that Brian Harsin offense. I think you're going to see a much more explosive offense, not only in 2023, but and beyond with Hugh Freeze once he gets more of the guys. And again, I would expect him to add maybe 6 or 7 more guys in the transfer portal in the month of May, probably the 2 positions you're gunning for, quarterback and wide receiver, just some more juice on the offensive side of the ball in terms of hitting those explosive plays. But again, hard to take much in terms of personnel, but a big-time recruiting weekend for Auburn. And then again, the physicality of the offensive line, you absolutely have to love that. Wanted to wrap it up with you guys, but again, if you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We appreciate all the support you guys have shown, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.